And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and please remain standing. That will be followed by a moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'll have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned annual meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse, Assembly Room 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, March 24th at 7:30 p.m., and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I would like to first thank all of the supervisors for their willingness to participate by WebEx and or phone in these challenging times. We know that things are changing on a daily basis, and your participation in these meetings this way, it will continue to facilitate the safety that we're trying to flatten the curve on people exposed to this terrible disease. So moving on, requesting everyone please silence their cell phones, or in this case, put your mics on mute, and we will proceed with roll call, and I'd ask the clerk to call roll. Please unmute your mic, respond, and then please put your mic or your phone back on mute again. Thank you.
Beestrom.
Here.
Boots.
Here.
Bovee.
Here.
Butke.
Here.
Christensen.
Here.
Seiler. Supervisor Seiler.
Here.
Crosby.
Here. Here.
Drabeck.
Here.
Durham. Here. Pfeifrick.
Here.
Gaber. Supervisor Gaber.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Gibbs.
Here.
Guild. Supervisor Guild.
Here.
Gums.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Krause. Here. Longenhan.
Here.
Leahy.
Here.
Lowe.
Here.
Mask.
Here.
McEwen.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Nutting.
Supervisor Nutting here.
Oberbeck.
Here.
Opal.
Here.
Robinson.
Here.
Rosenberg.
Here.
Schaefer.
Here.
Schley.
Here.
Seefelt.
Here.
Soybert.
Here.
Stark.
Here.
Tremelling.
Here.
Vole. Supervisor Vole. Wagner.
Wagner here.
White.
Here.
Zhang.
Here.
Zerini.
Here. Here.
Thank you. And again, we are improving on our ability to use technology. So I again thank the supervisors for their willingness to utilize technology in these times. I'd like to acknowledge and welcome the visitors that we have viewing the meeting, and also the two department heads that we have in attendance in the meeting tonight. We will move on to, we have a rather short agenda. We have the consent agenda, items B7 through items B11D1. What is the pleasure of the board? And I will recognize the individual and then make your motion and then put your mic back on mute.
Move to approve, Schaefer.
Schaefer with the motion to approve. Is there a second?
Frick.
Supervisor Pfifferich with a second. Is there any discussion on any of the agenda items, items 7B through B11D1?
Supervisor Gibbs, this is Supervisor Robinson. I have, again, the question relative to 11C3 as it relates to the salaries for elected officials. Specifically, is this precedent setting for us relative to all of our employees as we enter into what will be a very tough budget time in light of what's happened in the last few weeks? And I'm wondering if the 3% needs to be reconsidered. We get some rationale as to why we went with the 3%.
Okay, I will pull that agenda item out and we will discuss that one separately. So the rest of the consent agenda, is there any other discussion? Any other discussion on any other agenda items from items B7 through B11D1, excluding item 11C3? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote, and I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Beestrom. Supervisor Beestrom.
Yes.
Boots.
Yes.
Bovee.
Yes.
Butke.
Aye.
Christensen.
Aye.
Seiler. Supervisor Seiler.
Aye.
Crosby. Supervisor Crosby.
Yes.
Drabeck.
Yes.
Durham. Pfeifferich.
Yes.
Gaber.
Yes.
Gibbs.
Yes.
Guild.
Yes.
Gums.
Yes.
Johnson.
Aye.
Krause. Longenhan.
Yes.
Leahy.
Yes.
Lowe.
Yes.
Mask.
Yes.
McEwen.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Nutting.
Nothing, yes.
Oberbeck.
Yes.
Opal.
Aye.
Robinson.
Aye.
Rosenberg.
Aye.
Schaefer.
Aye.
Schley. Supervisor Schley.
Aye.
Seefelt,
Aye.
Soibert,
Aye.
Stark,
Aye.
Tremelling,
Aye.
Vole, Wagner,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Zhang,
Aye.
Zerini.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we still have a few people on the phone that haven't muted their phones when we return, or you return from voting. We are now down to item 11C3, a resolution to establish salaries for elected department heads, county clerk, register of deeds, of the treasurer for the upcoming term of office. And I've invited the HR director to give us a little background and a little bit of information as to, and then the finance committee unanimously approved this resolution moving forward of setting the salaries.
First of all, okay, to answer your first question, this wouldn't be precedent setting for any other employee group. What the board has decided to do years ago was we pay the elected officials at the midpoint, or now called the control point of the pay range, which is kind of what it goes as the market rate. And then in subsequent years, we provide them with a lump sum increase based on what the county board adopts as a percentage wage increase for all the other employees. In the last few years, it has been 2%. So those elected officials have been salaried at the midpoint, and then we give them a 2% lump sum, like as you can see on the in the packet there. For instance, the county clerk in 2020 received $1,668 a lump sum. That's a 2% of that annual salary. So I'm looking at how to move forward for 2021. 3%. We're suggesting 3% as for the lump sum for the elected officials for 2021, and then subsequent years would be whatever the county board decides for the annual wage increases for the employees. Now, one thing different about the elected officials, they just get that lump sum, where some of our other employees could receive a lump sum or a base salary increase, which can compound over time, like over a 4-year term, for instance. I put in 3%. I thought that would be reasonable. This was a couple months ago, looking at what the trend has been nationally. It's been about 3%, a little bit more than 3% as a salary increase. We've been at 2% for the last few years. We settled the deputy sheriff labor agreement, and in 2021, they're looking at a 2%, and then in July, there's some adjustments made to the steps, and it kind of equates to about a 3% overall. So that's kind of where that 3% number came from. And again, that's just for 2021, and it's not binding on any other group of employees like our other non-represented. That would be determined later when you set the budget in November.
Okay, also just a note, because the motion to separate, or not the motion, the chair pulled the item, I will still recognize this as being moved and seconded to adopt. And so is there any further discussion on the motion to approve?
Supervisor Robinson, I have a question for Frank. What would a 3% increase for all of our employees equate to in terms of dollars?
Oh, boy. That's a good question. And I don't have any documents in front of me. I'm trying to, yeah, I really can't give you a good number there. I'm sorry at this. But I think 2% was about $1 million. I think, so it might be $1.5 million if you go 3. according to my math. Which isn't that good.
Okay, is there any other discussion?
Supervisor Johnson.
Supervisor Johnson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question is, having negotiated tons of contracts myself, if there's no recruitment or retention problem, why are we giving any lump sum to any employee? And especially since these are elected officials who know what the salary is coming in. It's essentially a bonus because it's not base building. And, you know, quite honestly, being a public employee for most of my career, I never saw a bonus once. Why are we even entertaining this thought? There's a published salary, and people know what they're getting into when they run for these positions. As you know, the county board froze its own salary, and we're all elected officials. I just don't see what the need is to provide any essential bonus. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I think the fact that if they're at midpoint, well, this is consistent with our pay for performance plan that is adopted for all employees, and so that would be my response to that. Any other discussion?
Matt Booth.
Supervisor Boots.
I guess my concern is this: if we're going to be doing raises in the midst of what's going on right now, I have a fear of what's going to happen as far as public outcry. How can we give raises right now when people are being laid off left and right? We're not working. I understand they say we're going to pull out of this, but how does this look in the public eye that we're going to be giving raises to elected officials that basically, I'll be honest with you, they're pretty secured in their jobs. If they're in there, it's not like they're laid off. I have a problem with this, I guess. I wouldn't have had a problem with this a month ago. I have a problem with this now. So it's just my opinion.
And I totally understand that just so everybody on the board understands, it is this board's responsibility to set the salaries for those elected positions prior to, just as the board did for the upcoming April election, set the salary for this board, or the next board. This board is responsible for setting the salaries for elected officials before they are able to take out nomination papers. So it is our responsibility to set that salary, just so everybody's clear. Any other discussion?
Yes, Tom Seibert here.
Supervisor Seibert is recognized.
I agree with Supervisor Boots. First off, where's the $1 million or $1.5 million going to come from? And without the sales tax that we're losing, it could be a month, it could be 2 months, it could be 3 months of no sales tax income. Has anybody figured out where this extra money is going to come from? That's my question.
That would be developed in the upcoming budget.
He's asking if it would be $1 million. Fiscal impact of this. Yeah. The fiscal impact of this is not $1 million. It's
$2,618 fiscal impact.
Just so everybody's clear, the resolution spells out the fiscal impact of this is, I would defer to Mr. Mattel.
$2,618 would be the fiscal impact in 2021.
So it is not $1.5 million. The $1.5 million would be if the board moved forward a 3% potential 3% salary adjustment for the future years, but that is got to be developed in the next budget. So this only affects the salaries of those elected that we're talking about. Again, the department head, county clerk, a register of deeds, treasurer for the upcoming terms. Is there any further discussion?
Supervisor Gums.
Supervisor Gums is recognized.
you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to agree with Supervisor Johnson. Someone like county clerk pulling in like $90,000. Really, does she need a $1,600? Start stopping stuff. Thank you.
Supervisor Gums, you're breaking up. Could you please repeat your comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Supervisor Johnson. County clerk gets $90,000 and needs a $1,600 bonus yet. I think it's a slap in the face to the working person of Marathon County. My opinion.
Okay, is there any other discussion?
Supervisor Overbeck?
Supervisor Overbeck is recognized.
I guess I agree with some of the raises. We're in extraordinary times right now, and we have no end in sight. And I think because even the county board chose not to raise the elected officials' salary, I think it would be a slap in the face to both the public that's losing the jobs, that's the fact that we're going to more unemployment. I think we're going to have a tough budget next year. So I agree that this should probably wait.
Okay, is there any other discussion?
Supervisor Nutting.
Supervisor Nutting's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have one point of clarification. If Mr. Mattel could restate that figure that he just pulled out of the air was 1 million, 1.5 million. Was that referring to the entire salary of all Marathon County employees?
Yes.
Because what was confusing is that we were understanding that that was what this increase was going to cost.
No,
Just restate that. Thank you.
okay, the resolution that you are voting on is a fiscal impact of $2,600. It is the raise to the elected officials only. The 1.5 million was an estimate if we were to provide a roughly 3% increase to all employees of Marathon County.
Could I add that it's a total cost, including Social Security, retirement, and workers' compensation costs that go along with those positions?
So that is not just dollars in the pocket of those elected officials. It is, that is the total overall cost to the county on the budget line item. Is there any further discussion?
Supervisor Johnson.
Supervisor Johnson's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I heard it said that this is not precedent setting, and I understand that. However, if I were negotiating for the union or for the employees in 2021, I would strongly point to this 3% raise as a benchmark actually as a starting point in negotiations. So even though it's not technically setting a precedent, it is setting a benchmark which could be used and potentially cost us that extra money, which we likely will not have in 2021. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Any other discussion?
Supervisor McEwen.
Supervisor McEwen.
Supervisor Gill.
Supervisor McEwen first and then Supervisor Gill next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the 2,600 for each one of these, or is that the total for the three?
That's the total fiscal impact for all, the raise for all three of those positions.
Thank you.
Supervisor Guild is recognized.
Thank you. So based upon some of the comments, it sounds like there's a chance that this may not go forward. If that is the case, what then happens? Does it just for the next 2 years?
The salary
4
would
years,
remain the
3
same as it was currently posted.
Okay, and can you refresh me on what the current is for the three positions?
I'll defer to the HR director.
Yes, I don't know if I think in your packet there is an attachment with some, like a spreadsheet there, and it shows that the county clerk's current salary is $83,422. The register of
Okay,
deeds.
so it is what the numbers are right there.
Under 20, yeah. The salary's really staying the same. We're just talking about a lump sum for them in the future.
thank you.
Any further discussion?
Supervisor Robinson.
Supervisor Robinson.
Question for Frank. So when I'm looking at that sheet, when I add the 3% up from the base, it comes to about 40 or 6,700, not 26. Are you subtracting out the lump sum payment from 2020 or 2020 versus?
That's what they received in 2020. We're just talking about 2021. So on the,
is the lump sum part of their future base?
correct. Well, the future base is really the same as the current base. We're not changing the base, but we're going to add, the resolution calls for 3% of that base to be paid in a lump sum.
Is it 3% of the, is it 3% of the base before the lump sum? You showed a salary for the clerk.
Correct, before the lump. That's not, the lump is not added to the base for elected officials. So they're at that midpoint or that control point, 83,442, then 3% lump would be 25,503 for that first example on top, the county clerk. That would be the lump in 2021.
So if I'm following that logic, the increase is a 1% increase because they got 2% last year. You're giving them 3%. You didn't increase the base.
No.
So they're getting a 1% raise next year?
Yeah, if you want to look at, they got a 2% lump in 2020 and then 1% more in 2021, which is 3. Correct.
So you're giving them a 1% increase next year.
Well, it's a 3% lump sum, but it's 1% more than they got in 2020.
Okay, is there any further discussion, further clarification?
Schaefer.
Supervisor Schaefer.
Again, this is directed to Frank. So when you look at that chart, Frank, when you look underneath county clerk, when you get way to the bottom, additional increase
It's the increase.
is 9.5.
Yeah.
So that's what it's going to cost more in 2021.
That's correct.
Versus.
It's the increase over 20. So that 2,618, you're right, that is the increase from what was provided in 2020. That's how much more it's going to cost. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm sorry, I messed that up.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the clerk call the roll, please.
Beestrom.
No.
Boots.
No.
Bovee.
No.
Butke.
Aye.
Christensen.
Aye.
Seiler.
No.
Crosby.
No.
Drabeck.
No.
Durham.
No.
Pfeifrick.
No.
Gaber.
No.
Gibbs.
Aye.
Guild.
No.
Gums.
No.
Johnson.
No.
Krause.
No.
Longenhan.
No.
Leahy.
No.
Lowe.
No.
Mask.
No.
McEwen.
No.
Miller.
Yes.
Nutting.
Nutting, yes.
Oberbeck.
No.
Opal.
No.
Robinson,
Aye.
Rosenberg,
No.
Schaefer,
Aye.
Schley,
No.
Seefelt,
Yes.
Soibert,
No.
Stark,
Yes.
Tremelling,
No.
Vole, Wagner,
No.
White,
Yes.
Zhang,
Yes.
Zerini,
Aye.
thank you.
And the motion is defeated. 12 ayes, 25 noes. Moving on to item C12. Text amendment changes to the General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County, Chapter 11.02, Animal Waste Management Ordinance, Ordinance 9-20. Before we get into a motion, I received a letter today, this afternoon, late this afternoon, about 3:30, from, and I want to read it to the board. It came from the Marathon County Farm Bureau, and it reads, "Dear members of Marathon County Board of Supervisors, the Marathon County Farm Bureau would respectfully request that the proposed changes to Chapter 11.02 dealing with the animal waste management be postponed and/or sent back to the Environmental Resources Committee until a time in which the farmers and the members of the general public are able to publicly attend a meeting to express their concerns. While there are certain changes that the Marathon County Farm Bureau supports, there are other changes that the farmers have concerns with. Marathon County Farm Bureau feels that not all farmers in Marathon County have been properly notified of the proposed changes in the Animal Waste Ordinance, Chapter 11.02. Therefore, many farmers have not been able to make public comments or ask questions. Obviously, with the advice from the state and federal government, we have been communicating with our farmers for the need to stay safe by adhering to the recommendations of staying at home. In light of the current situation, we ask the Marathon County Board Chairman and supervisors to postpone the full board vote or send the ordinance back to the Environmental Resources Committee. Once farmers are informed and have a chance to comment, the Environmental Resources Committee can again decide as to whether to refer the ordinance to the full board. We hope that the Marathon County Board of Supervisors understands that it will take into consideration our farmers' wish to be able to attend the county board meeting to express our concerns in person, and that you will consider postponing to the next public meeting and/or sending back to the Environmental Resources Committee such definitive action. Signed, sincerely, Policy Development Committee, Marathon County Farm Bureau." What I would like to also invite before we get into a motion is I would like to invite the Director of Land Conservation of the Zoning Department, Paul Daigle, and explain what policy or procedures were taken in providing a public hearing for this issue moving forward. Is there any objection? Is there any objection? Paul?
Kurt, there's no objection. Could we also hear from the head of the standing committee, Supervisor Longenhan, about his thoughts on this, please? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Supervisor Longenhan, can I be recognized by the chair, please?
Sure. Supervisor Longenhan is recognized first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's some information based on correspondence that I've had with Farm Bureau over the course of the last week that I'd like to share with the rest of the County Board of Supervisors here. But I would feel that we should have staff give a little bit more background as far as how they've communicated with the community as far as notice with the public hearing. And then from there, I can give a little bit more insight what I think we should do going forward and a little bit more background on the ordinance. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, is there any objection to having Paul Daigle explain the whole process that they used in developing this ordinance and moving it from the committee to the full board unanimously? Any objection? Seeing none, I would invite Paul to give the history on the changes and the procedures that were used to try to involve the public in this proposed ordinance change.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs and Board of Supervisors, for allowing me to speak tonight. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So just to provide a little context, the outcome we want is to put in place updates to our ordinance would provide minimal safeguards to protect against direct runoff that degrades surface and groundwater, clarify our administrative rules and enforcement that we went over at length with Corporation Council's Mr. Corbett. We're putting in place uniform and consistent state performance standards and prohibitions. Nothing exceeds state standards. This would include unconfined manure piles that are in the water quality management area within 300 feet of a stream, direct barnyard runoff, and overgrazing of stream banks, as well as over-application of animal waste. And just to also point out that any enforcement requires a bona fide offer a cost share to any farmer, including up to 90% cost sharing if there's economic hardship. In regards to the public engagement, obviously the minimum engagement is 2 public notices in the Wausau Daily Herald, which we met. But we realized that we needed to reach out to the entire community that has a stake in water quality. And we first worked with and had an interview with the Record Review, and there was a front page article on it, which also included the announcement of 2 informational meetings that we had. We also publicized those meetings through social media, website postings, engaging the Old Plain Partnership for Integrated Conservation, which includes Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, individual farmers, Wisconsin Valley Improvement, the Big Old Plain Citizens Organization, DNR, amongst major stakeholders. We asked these groups to share all of this information and engage their members. So we really reached out through social media to do that. We also engaged state employees and Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection in the Wisconsin DNR to provide input into our ordinance, and they approved of the changes that we're making as well, and they're consistent with state law. We also emailed all the agronomists we work with on nutrient management and provided an overview as well as direct links to the proposed changes. We posted it on our own CPZ website, which we know isn't highly viewed, but we did postings to, just as general information. We also, in addition, emailed farmers that we knew of that might be of interest to this. And I also personally reached out to farmers that I knew would be interested in this ordinance, especially Farm Bureau. Immediately after Environmental Resources decided to hold the public hearing, I engaged with Farm Bureau. They did come to our first information meeting where I sat for approximately at least an hour with 2 of the 4 members of their executive committee and went over page by page the changes that are proposed. And they seem to be accepting of the changes that were there. We also had several follow-up phone calls with farmers to clarify information. We had several towns weigh in support of the proposal. We sent this proposed changes to every town in Marathon County, the town officials. In addition, we did receive letters of support from an agronomist, Matthew Omican with Shortline Agriculture. We received a letter of support from the Big Plains Citizen Organization. We received letters of support from the town of Spencer and the town of Plover. The one thing that I just want to point out is that if these are really just minimal safeguards. Right now, if a farmer were to start a 200 cow dairy in Marathon County and chose to daily haul and spread his manure, if that farm currently didn't have a nutrient management, they would not even have to come into CPZ for any type of permit. After this, if this ordinance were to be adopted, they still would not have to come into Marathon County for any type of permit. This is really to react to direct discharges and runoff problems into the waters in Marathon County, approximately which half of are considered impaired by the Wisconsin DNR. With that, I'm open to any questions to what we're proposing.
Okay, is there any questions directly to Mr. Daigle?
Yes, Tom Seibert here.
Supervisor Seibert's recognized.
Paul, does this go hand in hand with what the sanitary departments are going through, like in Marathon and Edgar and Stratford, and to get rid of that phosphorus? I mean, is that the issue? Is to clean up these streams and try to get this phosphorus out? I know firsthand from Rosalvo's sanitary department, we created 60 pounds of phosphorus last year. So far, we've got $26,000 spent on just engineering fees to remove 60 pounds of phosphorus.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, but this is part of the strategy with the Wisconsin River total maximum daily load to reduce phosphorus and sediment into the waters of the state. And this is really to safeguard it and get after the worst of the worst type of situations. And it will be one step towards trying to reduce phosphorus into those waters. Your question is right on and direct. Yeah.
Okay, is there any other questions that are directed at Supervisor or at Mr. Daigle?
I just have one more for Paul.
Go ahead, Supervisor Seibert.
Paul, do you know how many people it takes that produces waste compared to one cow?
It depends on the size of the cow and everything, but approximately 15 to 18 people is equivalent to one cow.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Supervisor Krause has a question. Supervisor Krause is recognized.
Yes, I would like to ask, how many farms are there, or dairy herds are there in Marathon County that are over 1,000 cows?
The question, Paul, was how many CAFOs do we have in Marathon County that are CAFOs?
The last report I've seen is we have 12. I believe that. I don't know of any new licensed ones.
Okay, there's 12 CAFOs. Again, CAFOs are not regulated under this ordinance. Those are regulated by the DNR direct. Any other questions for Mr. Daigle? Thank you, Paul, and thank you for attending. And I would hope that you would stay on in case some questions do arise. I would recognize Supervisor Langenhan, the chair of the ERC committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to get started here with respect to Supervisor Seibert's question, remember, let's not get this confused with other things as far as point versus non-point pollution. You know, with an ordinance like this, we're looking to address non-point pollution. So agricultural runoff is the number one thing that we think about when we're talking about making changes here. As far as a little bit more background, though, March 5th, the Environmental Resources Committee met. We had our public hearing for the amendments here that are presented to you this evening. Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we only had one gentleman in the audience during the public hearing, and the gentleman also did not speak. So besides what was read into the record by staff, that was the only information that we had available at this time. Over the past about week and a half, I've had conversations with Farm Bureau members. To be perfectly honest with the rest of the board, there's really one concern with the amendments, and that has to do with something called manure stacking. Manure stacking is just like what it sounds like. It's piling manure. And there are some members of the community that are concerned with the size of what's allowable under this code. Even though it's been clarified that we are only concerned if that manure is in a waterway. So if you put a stack of manure in a waterway, it does seem like that's something that the county should be able to address. You know, as Paul said, we want to be able to address the worst of the worst here. And further to that point, it's not like if this ordinance is passed that our staff are going to be going out and writing citations when they start seeing violations. They have a stepped enforcement process where they meet with the farmers to try and come to a conclusion where they come into compliance. And thus far, it seems to be doing okay. Now, that being said, and based on the conversations and the letter that was sent to Chairman Gibbs and myself today, I myself would feel comfortable, will feel more comfortable if we did allow additional testimony from the Farm Bureau. To my knowledge, we really have nothing to lose if we wait a little bit longer to get these text amendment changes on the books. It's not like we're working with a deadline as we may have been in the past with other ordinance changes. So we could give them the opportunity to provide additional comments. And to be honest with the rest of you, I feel that we should really respect the community partnerships that we have. And if there are other concerned farmers out there, I think that we should allow them to have a shot at addressing the ERC and being able to make their comments. Because if we are missing something, we want to know about that. We don't want to shut the door on the public. So with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we send these amendments back to the ERC for further review and further comment.
Supervisor Schley.
Supervisor Schley is recognized.
Yes, I would second Supervisor Langenhan's motion. I had contact this week with a number of farmers that pretty much expressed the same concerns that Supervisor Langenhan brought up, so I'm not going to go over them again, but I totally agree. I think we should have send it back to ERC and hash it over again and have a little more public input that we can make sure we get a lot of these farmers notified. Thank you.
Supervisor Overbeck.
Supervisor Overbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was my understanding at the ERC committee, wasn't it, that this amount is set by the state? Can you please explain that?
Sure. The definition that the Supervisor Langenhan is referring to is referenced and is verbatim out of state statute. Under state statute, this county cannot regulate any stricter standards than the state has authorized. And so the definition of the stacked manure that we're talking about is directly from state statute and is not any different than the state statute standards.
Mr. Chair, this is Supervisor Langenhan.
Supervisor Langenhan.
Thank you. Just a point to clarify that, yeah, and that was presented to us at the meeting. And to be honest, and again, to the rest of the board, you know, when we were presented the initial dimensions of the stacking, there were at least 4 members that have a pretty deep background in agriculture that were fairly skeptic of that size, of those sizes and dimensions. And we even questioned that, well, wait a minute, are CAFO subject to the same standards as this? And staff said yes. But here's the thing. The farmers that are concerned about this ordinance, at least the ones that I've talked to in the past week and a half, they don't know that. And I feel that if we were able to communicate that to the farmers and address those concerns at the public comment, if we were fortunate enough to refer this back to ERC for additional comment, I feel that we could pass this on a heck of a lot solider footing than where we are right now, because I would feel very uncomfortable with the correspondence that was presented to you this evening by Chairman Gibbs if we were to pass this and not take into consideration those other concerns. Manure stacking is only one of them. There could be others out there. That's just the main issue that's been presented thus far. So I would urge the rest of the board to support moving this back to ERC. And with that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, after consulting with, the board, please. After consulting with the Corp Council, the motion to refer to committee is normally after we have had a motion to approve. So the motion to refer to committee, I'm going to rule is out of order at this point. But once we have a motion and second on the floor to adopt, then a motion to refer back to committee would be in order. So at this point, we have, no motion on the floor at this point. So I would accept a motion to approve.
Supervisor Schaefer, move.
Supervisor Schaefer is recognized with a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Supervisor Langenhan, second.
Supervisor Langenhan with a second. Now, is there any discussion?
Supervisor Langenhan.
And now a motion to refer would be in order. Supervisor Langenhan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move to refer this back to ERC for additional comment. Thank you.
Supervisor Langenhan's motion is to refer back to committee for further public comment. Is there any? Is there a second?
Supervisor Schley, second.
Supervisor Schley with a second. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion to refer back to committee?
Supervisor Overbeck.
Supervisor Overbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I have is, what benefit is it to send it back to committee rather than delaying the voting on this and letting staff talk to the individuals if that is the policy that has been set on a one-to-one basis rather than having another public hearing, basically. And I guess my recommendation would be that staff, before we vote, that staff would talk to the organization, go through that with them, and then if there's an issue, to bring it back to the committee.
I would invite Mr. Daigle to explain the conversations that he's had with this organization to this point.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So besides the initial meeting one-on-one with, or not one-on-one, I was with 2 of the 4 members of the executive committee to go over it in depth. I also had several phone calls. I extended 2 separate invitations to attend their board meetings, their executive board meetings, to explain the ordinance changes to them. I also, talked to individuals that called in with comments, and their biggest concern was exactly what Langen had pointed to, and that would be the size of the manure pile in the water quality management area. And if that's truly a concern of the board, and I would perhaps offer that rather than sending the ordinance back to committee, remove that definition for the unconfined manure pile from the definition section and pass the rest of the ordinance as is. And then staff would go back and engage Farm Bureau as well as other farm organizations and stakeholders in water quality to see what might be more palatable, because that was their primary sticking point. They also questioned the definition of pasture, but that definition has been in our ordinance for at least 7 years.
I also, thank you, Mr. Daigle. I also have had several discussions with individuals, and they pointed to that exact same thing. But then when I provided the information that this definition is in state statutes, and that Marathon County is prohibited from imposing stricter standards, and that we are just using the state statutes language, they were a little more accepting of it. And then so I posed the other question to the individuals, and that was, what would be an acceptable definition? And to that answer, they didn't have one. And so if you look at what this is doing, what this ordinance is looking at, it's looking at trying to protect the waters of Marathon County from stacking manure within the distance of a stream. And so if most and 95% of farmers are probably in compliance, and there is not an issue, and the individuals that are in violation, if we take this out and have no definition, we have no enforcement for those people that do pile manure closer to the waterway. So, any other discussion on the motion to refer back to committee?
Supervisor Langenhan.
Supervisor Langenhan.
So these must be strange times, because all I'm doing is asking for one more meeting. Coming from me, that sounds a little interesting. So I just want to make a few, it sounds like discussion is wrapping up, so I just want to make a few final points. As far as being able to go back and change things, I just want to say I would rather be preemptive than reactive. If there is something, I would rather have everything set in stone for the most part, or as much as possible, and have it on the books as solidly as possible before we pass it all together. Taking this in pieces just doesn't seem appealing to me. And then one final point. Yeah, it's unfortunate that these conversations are happening at the 11th hour, and that these individuals did not show up to our public hearing. But again, this discussion is about respecting the community groups who have the same interests as us in protecting the groundwater that we all appreciate here in Marathon County. So again, I'd urge you all to support this. It's not like we're under a deadline, and I feel that if we do this, we can still be on solid footing. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion? The motion is to refer back to committee. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Beestrom,
Yes.
Boots,
Yes.
Bovee,
No.
Butke,
Aye.
Christensen,
Aye.
Seiler,
Aye.
Crosby,
Yes.
Drabeck,
Yes.
Durham,
No.
Pfeifrick,
No.
Gaber,
Aye, yes.
Gibbs,
No.
Guild,
No.
Gums,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Krause, Longenhan,
Yes.
Leahy,
No.
Lowe,
No.
Mask,
No.
McEwen,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nutting,
Nutting, yes.
Oberbeck,
No.
Opal,
Yes.
Robinson,
No.
Rosenberg,
No.
Schaefer,
Aye.
Schley,
Aye.
Seefelt,
Yes.
Soibert,
No.
Stark, Supervisor Stark, Tremelling. I'm sorry, Supervisor Stark? Supervisor Stark, did you vote?
I vote no.
Thank you. Supervisor Tremelling,
Yes.
Vole, Wagner,
Wagner, no.
White,
No.
Zhang,
No.
Zerini.
Yes.
Thank you.
The motion passes. The agenda item is referred back to committee. The vote is 20 to 17 in the affirmative to refer back to committee. Moving on to item number C, 13, amending section 2.05 of the General Code of Ordinances Task Force on Marathon County county board size to extend the deadline for delivery of a recommendation to December 2020 ordinance 10-20. If this board will recall, when we passed this ordinance in January, we had a sunset date that the recommendation was to be brought to the next board by July. In reviewing the timeline and in light of a number of supervisor potential changes of up to 14, the executive committee recommended that we move the date to December for this report of this committee, and that would be in time to provide a recommendation based on board size that this board would have a report, the next board, would have a report to the new board and then make a recommendation and a resolution adopting the size of the districts and the number of districts. In the last census, that was done in February following the census taking. And so this would fit the timeline in correspondence with a recommendation from that task force. So with that, what is the pleasure of the board?
Supervisor Nutting moves.
Could you please repeat that?
Supervisor Nutting moves to approve.
Supervisor Nutting with a motion to approve. Is there a second? Supervisor Durham with the second on the motion. This does require a 2/3 majority of the board, of the people present, excuse me. Is there any discussion on the motion? Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll have the clerk read the roll, please.
Beestrom.
Yes.
Boots.
Yes.
Bovee.
Yes.
Butke.
Aye.
Christensen. Supervisor Christensen. Seiler.
Aye.
Crosby.
Yes.
Drabeck.
Yes.
Durham.
Yes.
Pfeifrick.
Yes.
Gaber.
Yes.
Gibbs.
Aye.
Guild.
Yes.
Gums.
Yes.
Johnson.
Nay.
Could you repeat that, Supervisor Johnson?
Nay.
Thank you. Supervisor Krause.
Yes.
Long and Han.
Yes.
Leahy.
Yes.
Lowe.
Yes.
Mask.
Yes.
McEwen.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Nutting.
Nutting, yes.
Oberbeck.
Yes.
Opal.
Nay.
Robinson.
Yes.
Rosenberg.
Yes.
Schaefer. Supervisor Schaefer.
Aye.
Schley.
Aye.
Seefelt.
Aye.
Soibert.
Yes.
Stark.
Yes.
Tremelling.
No.
Vole. Wagner.
Wagner, yes.
White.
Yes.
Zhang.
Yes.
Zerini.
Yes.
Christensen. Thank you.
And the motion is passed, although it is not unanimous. Moving on to item C, 13A, amending Section 2.01 of the General Code of Ordinances to create an emergency rule continuing the seating of existing members of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors in the event the 2020 spring election is postponed from April 7th, 2020. Ordinance 0-11-20. Give a little context. Under the state statutes, if the election were not to be held on April 7th of 2020, and the organizational meeting not held on April 21st of 2020, because of the way the statutes are written, there would be no county board in place in Marathon County. Under a opinion by the attorneys of Von Brason and Roper, self-organized counties have the ability to adopt this rule if there is a postponement of the election. If the legislature and or the governor were to act to postpone and include a provision that they would be superseding and we've written it right that this change would be superseded by the legislature and or the governor. The concern that I had and brought to the executive committee was that if at a late moment there was a challenge to the validity or a challenge legally to the election being held on April 7th, and it was postponed without legislative action and without governor action, there would be no room or no ability to have a county board in place to manage the county in its county board's role. And so the executive committee met and discussed this option. And again, this is not to supersede any authority from the legislature. If the legislature were to act and or if the election is held on April 7th, this rule would no longer apply. So with that explanation, what is the pleasure of the board?
Yi Ling Zhang, motion to approve.
Supervisor Zhang with a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Who is the second, excuse me?
McEwen.
Vice Chair McEwen with a second. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion? This does require 2/3 majority or 25 positive ayes to pass. I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Beestrom.
Aye.
Boots. Supervisor Boots?
Aye.
Bovee.
Yes.
Butke.
Aye.
Christensen.
Aye.
Seiler.
Aye.
Crosby.
Yes.
Drabeck.
Yes.
Durham.
Yes.
Pfeifrick.
Yes.
Gaber.
Yes.
Gibbs.
Aye.
Guild.
Yes.
Gums. Supervisor Gums? Johnson?
Aye.
Krause?
Yes.
Longenhan?
Yes.
Leahy?
Yes.
Lowe?
Yes.
Mask?
Yes.
McEwen?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Nutting?
Nutting, yes.
Overbeck?
Yes.
Opal?
Aye.
Aye.
Robinson,
Aye.
Rosenberg,
Aye.
Schaefer,
Aye.
Schley,
Aye.
Seefelt,
Aye.
Soibert,
Yes.
Stark,
Yes.
Tremelling,
Yes.
Vole, Wagner,
Wagner, aye.
White,
Yes.
Zhang,
Yes.
Zrini, Gums. Thank you.
The motion is carried unanimously. Moving on, Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to create 2 full-time, 1 FTE social services professional, social worker, children's long-term support position, and amend the 2020 budget, Resolution 22-20. What is your pleasure?
Stark, move to approve.
Supervisor Stark with a motion to approve.
Any second.
Supervisor Crosby, second. Any discussion? This is a grant-funded position. This is not, even though it is a budget amendment, it is a grant-funded position. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the roll.
Beestrom,
Yes.
Boots,
Yes.
Bovee,
Yes.
Butke,
Aye.
Christensen, Supervisor Christensen, Seiler,
Aye.
Crosby,
Yes.
Drabeck,
Yes.
Durham,
Yes.
Pfeifrick,
Yes.
Gaber,
Yes.
Gibbs,
Aye.
Guild,
Yes.
Gums,
Yes.
Johnson,
Aye.
Krause,
Yes.
Longenhahn,
Yes.
Leahy,
Yes.
Lowe,
Yes.
Mask,
Yes.
McEwen,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nutting,
Nutting, aye.
Oberbeck,
Yes.
Opal,
Aye.
Robinson,
Aye.
Rosenberg,
Aye.
Schaefer,
Aye.
Schley,
Aye.
Seefelt,
Aye.
Soibert,
Yes.
Stark,
Aye.
Tremelling,
Yes.
Vole, Wagner,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Zhang,
Yes.
Zrini,
Aye.
Christensen,
Aye.
thank you.
And the motion is carried unanimously. Moving on to item D15, to create 1 full-time 1.0 FTE Senior Social Services Coordinator, Community Support Specialist position, and amend the 2020 budget, Resolution 23-20. What is the pleasure of the board?
White, move to approve.
Supervisor White with a motion to approve. And a second? Supervisor,
Second.
Supervisor Krause with a second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed with the roll call of the vote.
Beestrom.
Yes.
Boots.
Aye.
Bovee.
Yes.
Butke.
Aye.
Christensen. Seiler.
Aye.
Crosby.
Yes.
Drabeck.
Yes.
Durham. Pfeifferich.
Yes.
Gaber.
Yes.
Gibbs.
Aye.
Guild.
Yes.
Gums.
Yes.
Johnson.
Aye.
Krause.
Yes.
Longenhan.
Yes.
Leahy.
Yes.
Lowe.
Yes.
Mask.
Yes.
McEwen.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Nutting.
Nutting, yes.
Oberbeck.
Yes.
Opal.
Aye.
Robinson. Supervisor Robinson. Rosenberg.
Aye.
Schaefer.
Aye.
Schley.
Aye.
Seefelt.
Aye.
Soibert.
Yes.
Stark.
Yes.
Tremelling.
Yes.
Vole. Wagner.
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Zhang.
Yes.
Zerini.
Aye.
Robinson. Supervisor Robinson? Thank you.
And the motion is carried unanimously. We are down to miscellaneous business. Item E, 16, announcements and/or requests. First off, I would like to thank this board for the opportunity to have served as your chair, and also look forward to the next term in the wish of the board as far as an opportunity to serve at your pleasure. I would also like to recognize there are 6 supervisors that have taken out non-candidacy papers, and seeing how this is their last meeting, and some of these supervisors have been on the board for some time. And I want to thank them personally for their service and their willingness to step up and support their citizens in their district. We have Supervisor Rosenberg, we have Supervisor Durham, we have Supervisor White, Supervisor Miller, Supervisor Tremelling, and Supervisor Schaefer are the 6 who have taken out non-candidacy papers. So I personally, as the chair, want to thank them for their service and wish them well in their future endeavors. Even though it'll be a applause of maybe 1, there will be an applause from the board. Okay. With that, I would open it up for any other announcements and/or requests.
Yes, I'd like to make an announcement.
Okay, Supervisor Krause.
Thank you. March is Women's History Month, and I'm not sure how many of you have ever studied women's history. I have would just like to take a couple minutes of your time to educate and inform you of women's history and the right to vote. From colonial times in the early 1600s and through the 1800s, women fought for the right to keep their own wages, to have rights to their children and their husband after their husband died, to have the ability to own property and to sign contracts, and to speak in public. Women were excluded from all walks of life except for wife, mother, and homemaker. Abigail Smith Adams was the wife of one of the creators of the U.S. Constitution, John Adams. Abigail was bright and was often asked for her opinions and advice on political matters by her husband, John Adams. As her husband, John, was preparing to create the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Abigail wrote him a letter asking him to remember the ladies in writing the Constitution, as women at that time were barred from participating in government. Women didn't have any legal rights and couldn't inherit or own property. Women were forbidden education, except for a very few from the wealthiest of families who were homeschooled or sent to a finishing school. And working women weren't allowed to keep their wages, which was given to their husband. Abigail Adams was known for her discussions and long letters on political issues of the time. In regard to women being included in the Declaration of Independence and in voting, John Adams disagreed with his wife, Abigail. In the U.S. Constitution fully adopted in 1790, it defined both men and women as citizens, but didn't spell out voting requirements. The details of voting was left to each state. Thus, voting rules varied from state to state. Women became upset about the laws which governed them as citizens, but in which they had no voice. Women worked and paid taxes, but had no voice in the government. Two women who were active in getting rights for women were Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Lucretia Mott was a Quaker minister and school teacher and raised 6 children. In the Quaker religion, men and women are created equal. It was an abomination against God that women would be treated unequal and that there was slavery. She hid escaping slaves in her home. As a woman teacher, she only received half of the pay that was given to male teachers, which brought her into working for suffrage for women. Elizabeth Cady Stanton became interested in women's rights and the inequalities of society through her father, an attorney and a U.S. congressman. Stanton was married to an attorney, an abolitionist, and was the mother of 5 children. She was a prolific writer for the suffrage movement. Both women, Mott and Stanton, from early on, were involved in the temperance movement and in the abolition of slavery and equality for women, as were their parents and family members. However, upon realizing that they couldn't affect any changes because they themselves had no legal rights, they then decided to work towards obtaining women's legal rights under state laws and the U.S. Constitution. On July 19th and 20th, 1848, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and about 400 others concentrated their activism from women's property rights, temperance, and abolition to women's suffrage. Mott and Stanton called a women's rights convention in Wesleyan Chapel at Seneca Falls, New York. This site is now a part of the Women's Rights National Historical Park. Elizabeth Cady Stanton drafted a Declaration of Sentiments modeled after the Declaration of Independence. She had never spoken before in public and was quite timid. She read the Constitution, inserting, "and women," saying, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, and that they had certain inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." At the very ending of the Seneca Falls Convention, Elizabeth Cady Stanton added that women should have the right to vote. Attendees were aghast. It was unheard of for women to be able to have voting rights. Women's suffrage was hotly debated. It was going to be voted down when former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass stood up and said, quote, "The power to choose rules and make laws is the right by which all others can be secured," unquote. At that, 68 women and 32 men voted to pass the Declaration of Sentiments, causing great media and public controversy, controversy, and spurring on the suffrage movement. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other announcements?
Yes, this is Supervisor Zhang.
Supervisor Zhang is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I realize that 2020 here has been a very difficult time for everybody here in central Wisconsin or all across the country here. And as we strive to continue to overcome this pandemic, I want to remind our visitors and also encourage my fellow colleagues to encourage individuals and supporters in the community here to be supportive and also and take care of one another, especially members of the AAPI community here. They are members of the AAPI community or Asian American community are being targeted across the country here for being bringers of the coronavirus or the COVID virus. And I hope to encourage my fellow colleagues here to also support these individuals and our neighbors as well, to encourage each other to support one another during these hard times. And together, we need to all be supportive of one another to be able to overcome and address this pandemic. And I hope that we will be able to overcome this pandemic sooner than later. Thank you.
Any other announcements?
Supervisor,
Oh,
Supervisor Christensen?
Supervisor Christensen and then Supervisor Rosenberg.
Yes, I just want to make the announcement that the Eastern Towns Association is meeting as council for April. And I have one other thing. The organization meeting for the county board is at the same date as the town's annual meeting is. I don't know how that's all going to work out this year with everything being canceled. So I just putting it out there, I guess.
Okay. Supervisor Rosenberg.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say thank you for the last 4 years. It's been really great getting to know local government through the county board. I want to give a special shout out to my mentor. I don't know why he was assigned to me in 2016, but Supervisor Jeff Zerini. So thank you for helping me figure this whole thing out. And also a great shout out to John Robinson, Supervisor Robinson, who knows everything. I do want to let you know that you will not be without a Supervisor Rosenberg next term. I know you've put up with us all for 22 years, but you'll have one coming up in Supervisor Lauren White's district. He's not running again, but Tom Rosenberg will be running. So you will not be without a Rosenberg.
Okay, any other announcements?
Supervisor.
Please again.
Supervisor Nutting.
Supervisor Nutting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Council for looking into shortening the agenda by putting a number of items onto the consent agenda. I wondered if that might also be taken into a little bit farther, whereby you might consider asking if each of these agenda items that do not go under the consent agenda, that you might ask if there is any negative votes, and that those could be voiced at that point in time, and then move the agenda item forward, as it would save time in not having to have the clerk call all the names. Something you might just consider for future meetings. Thank you, sir.
You bet. We'll discuss that with Corp Counsel. Any other announcements? If not, I have one other announcement. As everybody may or may not be aware, the governor signed the Safe at Home order number 12. Is to go into effect at 8 a.m. Tomorrow morning. And non-essential businesses are to be closed. And in that light, I have had the opportunity to work with the administrator in working and trying to come up with a potential, or not a potential, a actual limiting the number of hours and therefore limiting the exposure of our employees. And so we are going to still be open. We are encouraging the public to call for a scheduled appointment in a lot of the departments. The courthouse, starting on Friday, will be open from 1 o'clock until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Otherwise, it will be closed to the public. And so, again, in efforts to keep the citizens safe and also the employees of Marathon County. And that email with all of those directives will be coming out to the supervisors later on this evening. And so you will be getting the same press release and order that will be going into effect starting tomorrow for some and Friday for the courthouse in limiting the hours of public access. With that, is there any other announcements? Not only was the Eastern Towns meeting canceled, but the Western Towns meeting was also canceled for later in April.
I have one for you, Kurt.
Go ahead.
This is Bovee.
Supervisor Bovee is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to remind everybody that coming up in April is National Child Abuse Awareness Month. Child abuse can come in two forms. It can be either physical or psychological. I would ask you all to research the subject. And if you see or suspect a child is being abused, please report it. If you report it, you might just save a life. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other announcements and/or requests? Seeing none, I will declare this meeting adjourned, and I thank everyone for their service on this board and look forward to working with each and every one of you moving forward on the next board. I again declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.